The whip cracked like thunder across the dusty main street of Prosperity, Colorado, but it was the scream that never came that made the crowd hold its breath. Spring of 1878 brought more than wildflowers to this frontier town. It brought a reckoning. A young bride in tatters, a tyrant's rage, and a stranger's blood would collide in those 60 seconds that changed everything. Before we ride into this storm together, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this tale can travel across this wild country of ours. The morning had started the way most mornings did in Prosperity, Colorado, with the smell of fresh bread from Muller's Bakery mixing with the acrid tang of horses and dust that seemed to define every frontier town trying to claw its way towards civilization. The spring of 1878 had been generous, painting the surrounding mountains in shades of green that promised good grazing and better times ahead. The town itself sat in a valley that God seemed to have carved specifically for men with ambition and women with endurance, surrounded by peaks that touched the clouds and meadows that rolled like ocean waves frozen in time. But beneath that postcard perfection, Prosperity harbored the same rot that infected most towns where one man held too much power and too little conscience. Anna Whitfield had known this truth her entire 22 years of life, but she'd never felt it quite as keenly as she did now, standing in what remained of her wedding dress, hands bound behind her back with rough hemp rope that bit into her wrists. The dress, oh God, the dress had been her mother's, carefully preserved in tissue paper and lavender sachets for 15 years waiting for this day. The ivory silk, yellowed slightly with age but still beautiful, had made her feel like a princess when she'd put it on that morning. Her mother's sister, Aunt Clara, had wept as she'd fastened the buttons up Anna's back, each one a tiny pearl that had cost her father 3 months of salary back when such extravagances seemed possible. Now those same buttons were torn away, half the bodice ripped open to expose her chemise underneath. The skirt was caked with mud and dust from where they dragged her through the street. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose, auburn waves falling around her shoulders in wild disarray. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, and her feet were bleeding because somewhere between the church and here, she'd lost both slippers. The whipping post stood in the center of town like a monument to man's capacity for cruelty. It was just a thick wooden beam sunk deep into the ground, worn smooth by weather and stained dark by things Anna didn't want to think about. Iron rings had been driven into it at various heights, and it was to one of these that they'd planned to tie her. The crowd had gathered the way crowds always did when something terrible was about to happen, with a mixture of horror, fascination, and that particular cowardice that allowed good people to watch bad things unfold without lifting a finger to stop them. Anna recognized most of the faces. There was Mrs. Patterson from the general store clutching her daughter's hand so tightly the girl's fingers had gone white. Tom Bradshaw, the blacksmith, stood with his arms crossed over his leather apron, his face carved from stone, but his eyes betraying his discomfort. The Hendersons, the Clarks, the Morgans, all of them people who'd smiled at her in church, who'd complimented her preserves at the county fair, who told her what a lovely bride she'd make someday. None of them were smiling now. "Bring her forward," Silas Granger commanded, and his voice carried the weight of someone who'd never been refused anything in his life. Silas Granger. Even his name tasted like ashes in Anna's mouth. At 53, he was the wealthiest man in 3 counties, owner of the massive Double G Ranch that sprawled across nearly 40,000 acres of prime Colorado grazing land. He ran 5,000 head of cattle, employed 60 men, and had a house that people called the Mansion, even though it was barely a decade old. His first wife had died in childbirth along with the baby 10 years ago, and his second wife had lasted only 3 years before succumbing to pneumonia, or so the official story went. Anna had heard whispers from women who spoke in hushed tones about bruises that couldn't be explained and a spirit broken long before the body gave out. Silas stood now on the raised wooden sidewalk in front of his attorney's office, dressed in a fine black suit that had been tailored in Denver. His hat was brushed beaver fur, his boots were polished to a mirror shine, and the gold watch chain that stretched across his vest probably cost more than most families in Prosperity earned in a year. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and a handlebar mustache that he waxed to sharp points. Some women called him distinguished. Anna called him a monster. Mr. Granger, please. Reverend Walsh stepped forward, his round face flushed with distress and sweat beading on his balding head. Surely we can resolve this in a more Christian manner. The young lady is clearly distraught. Perhaps if we gave her time to reconsider. She's had 6 months to reconsider. Silas cut him off with the casual dismissal of someone swatting a fly. 6 months since her father signed the contract agreeing to this union. 6 months of me being patient, being understanding, being considerably more generous than any man in my position needed to be. I paid off every cent of William Whitfield's debts, debts that would have seen his family turned out onto the street. I offered a settlement that would have secured their future, and all I asked in return was what had been promised to me, his daughter's hand in marriage. Sold. Anna's voice cracked as she spoke, but she forced the word out anyway. He sold me, like cattle, like property. That's not a marriage contract, that's... The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Silas's foreman, a scarred brute named Dutch Kemper, backhanded her across the mouth hard enough that she tasted blood. The crowd gasped, but no one moved. No one ever moved when Dutch was involved. That's enough out of you, Dutch growled. He was a head shorter than Silas, but twice as mean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull axe. A knife scar ran from his left ear down to his collar, and his knuckles were perpetually scabbed from the violence he dispensed with casual regularity. You'll speak when Mr. Granger gives you permission to speak, and not before. Anna's ears rang from the blow, but she kept her eyes up, kept her spine straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cower. Her father had been weak, God rest his soul, dead now 3 months from the consumption that had been eating him alive for years. But she would not be. Whatever they did to her, she would face it standing tall. The law is on my side, Silas continued, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket and holding it up for the crowd to see. William Whitfield's signature, witnessed and notarized. A legal contract in which he accepted $1,500 to settle his debts in exchange for his daughter's agreement to marry me within 1 year of the signing. That year is up. The wedding was scheduled for today, and this ungrateful girl refused to speak her vows. Because I don't love you, Anna shouted, and this time when Dutch moved toward her, she flinched back but kept talking. Because you're old enough to be my father, because your last wife. Careful. Silas's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Very careful about what you say next, Miss Whitfield. Slander is a serious accusation. Is it slander if it's true? Anna demanded, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Rage, yes, but also something else. Fear, maybe, that someone might finally call him out on the whispered rumors that had followed him for years. That's enough, Silas roared, and several people in the crowd actually stepped backward. I have been more than patient. I have been more than fair. This girl's father took my money, spent my money, and died leaving me with a contract and a defiant bride who thinks her feelings matter more than her word, more than her father's word. Well, I'm here to teach her, and everyone else in this town, that contracts matter, that honor matters, that when you make a deal with Silas Granger, you keep it. By whipping her? Reverend Walsh tried again, his voice quavering. Mr. Granger, I beg you to reconsider. This is not how civilized people... Civilized? Silas laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Reverend, we're 700 miles from the nearest real city. We're surrounded by Indians, outlaws, and wilderness that kills more people every year than disease and accident combined. Civilization is a luxury we can't afford out here. What we need is order. We need people to understand that agreements have consequences, that defiance has consequences. He turned to Dutch, who had produced a bullwhip from somewhere, a long, wicked thing with a braided leather lash that looked like it could strip the hide off a buffalo. Anna's stomach turned to ice. 10 lashes, Silas announced, administered here in public so that everyone understands what happens when you break a contract with me. After that, Miss Whitfield can make her choice. She can agree to honor her father's word and marry me this afternoon as planned, or she can take her chances in the world with nothing but the clothes on her back and the scars on her back to show for her pride. No, Anna breathed, but her voice was lost in the sudden murmur that rippled through the crowd. 10 lashes. Men had died from less, and even if she survived, she'd be scarred for life, marked forever, as someone who defied Silas Granger and paid the price. "Tie her to the post," Silas ordered. Dutch grabbed Anna's arm with fingers like iron bands and dragged her forward. She tried to resist, tried to plant her feet, but she might as well have been trying to stop a landslide. He shoved her against the whipping post, and she felt the rough wood scrape against her cheek as he reached for the rope to bind her. "Please," she whispered, hating herself for the word but unable to stop it. "Please don't do this." "Should have thought of that before you embarrassed Mr. Granger in front of the whole town," Dutch muttered, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone, as if he genuinely regretted what he was about to help do to her, but not enough to stop. Never enough to actually stop. He'd just finished tying her wrist to the iron ring when a voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Hold on there!" Everyone turned. Anna, her cheek still pressed against the post, could only see out of the corner of her eye. But what she saw made her breath catch. A man sat on a dusty brown horse at the edge of the crowd, and he looked like he'd ridden out of one of the dime novels that Mrs. Patterson kept hidden behind the counter at the general store. He was tall, she could tell even with him sitting, with broad shoulders and a lean, rangy build that spoke of hard work and harder living. He wore a battered brown hat pulled low over his eyes, a faded blue shirt that had seen better days, and denim trousers tucked into scuffed leather boots. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster tied down with a leather thong in the manner of someone who knew how to use it and wanted it accessible. But it was his face that caught her attention. Even from this angle, even with half of it shadowed by his hat, she could see he was handsome in a rough-hewn way, strong jaw dusted with several days' worth of stubble, a mouth set in a firm line, and eyes that she somehow knew would be intensely blue, even though she couldn't quite see them from here. "Who the hell are you?" Silas demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol he wore beneath his jacket. The stranger swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. He took his time hitching the animal to the rail, patting its neck, adjusting his gun belt. Everything about him radiated a calm that bordered on insolent. "Name's Jack Mercer," he said finally, his voice carrying that distinctive drawl of someone from Texas or Oklahoma, somewhere south and west where the sun beat down hard and men talked slow. "And I'm here to tell you that you've got a problem with your little, demonstration here." "The only problem I have is people interfering in my business," Silas said coldly. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Mercer. I suggest you ride on before you find yourself joining Miss Whitfield at the post." Jack walked forward into the crowd, which parted for him like water around a stone. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from having been in dangerous situations so many times that they'd become almost boring. Anna watched him approach with a mixture of hope and terror. Hope that someone, anyone, might actually stand up to Silas Granger, and terror at what would happen when Silas crushed this stranger the way he crushed everyone else. "See? That's where you're wrong," Jack said, stopping about 10 feet from where Dutch still held Anna against the post. "This does concern me, because that woman you're about to whip, she's already taken." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. "What?" Silas's face went from pale to purple in the span of a heartbeat. "What did you just say?" "I said she's taken," Jack repeated, his voice steady as stone. "Spoken for, promised. Which means your contract with her dead daddy doesn't mean a damn thing, because you can't sell what you don't own." Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. What was this man doing? She'd never seen him before in her life, had no idea who he was or why he'd chosen this moment to apparently lie himself into a fight with the most dangerous man in 3 counties. "That's impossible," Silas sputtered. "William Whitfield would have mentioned there was no one. She wasn't engaged to anyone." "Shows what you know," Jack said, and now Anna could see his eyes as he moved closer, and yes, they were blue. The kind of blue that made her think of summer skies and cold mountain streams. The arrangement was made years ago, before old William got himself into trouble. Private family matter. But I've got the papers to prove it. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out what looked like an official document, folded and slightly yellowed with age. Silas snatched it from his hand, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded it. Anna held her breath. Whatever game this stranger was playing, it was a dangerous one. If Silas discovered the document was fake, and how could it be anything but fake? Then Jack Mercer would be lucky if he only got arrested. More likely, He'd end up at the bottom of a ravine somewhere with a bullet in his back and a story about how he'd resisted arrest. But as Silas read, his face went from purple to white. His hands shook so badly the paper rattled. This is... Where did you get this? He looked up at Jack with something that might have been fear in his eyes. Told you, Jack said calmly. Family matter. William Whitfield and my father were old friends, came west together back in the 50s. They made an arrangement. When William had a daughter and my father had a son, we'd be joined together, unite the families. Old-fashioned, sure, but that's how things were done back then. Why would William never mention this? Silas demanded, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Why would he? Jack shrugged. Far as he was concerned, the matter was settled. I've been working up in Montana the last few years, building up my stake, making sure I could provide proper. Planned to come down here this spring to claim my bride and take her home. Except I arrived to find out her father's dead and some... He paused, letting his eyes rake over Silas with undisguised contempt. Some buzzard has been trying to scavenge what doesn't belong to him. The crowd was murmuring now, a low buzz of speculation and surprise. Anna felt dizzy, unable to process what was happening. This man, this complete stranger, was claiming they were engaged? And he had documents that Silas apparently found convincing? Let me see that. Silas's attorney, a weaselly man named Cornelius Finch, pushed forward and took the document from his client's shaking hands. He studied it for a long moment, his lips moving as he read, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. The silence stretched taut as a wire about to snap. Finally, Finch looked up, his face grave. Mr. Granger, This appears to be legitimate. It's notarized, dated 15 years ago, signed by both William Whitfield and Jacob Mercer Sr. The terms are very specific. Upon the daughter reaching her 20th year, she would be promised to the son, with a land settlement from the Whitfield estate as dowry. But William's land was mortgaged to me, Silas protested. I hold the deed. You hold a mortgage, Finch corrected quietly. Not the same thing. And according to this document, the land in question, Section 42, the Eastern Meadow property, was specifically reserved from any future debt obligations precisely because it was meant to be Miss Whitfield's marriage settlement. That land is worth $3,000, maybe more. Silas looked like he might have a stroke. You're telling me William kept that from me? I'm telling you that according to this contract, which predates your arrangement with Mr. Whitfield by several years, this woman was already promised to another man, Finch said, which means your contract is void. You can't marry someone who's already legally bound to someone else. Anna couldn't breathe. This was insane. This was impossible. There was no Eastern Meadow property. Her father had mortgaged everything they owned to pay for her mother's medical care before she died. There was no land settlement, which meant this document, however official it looked, had to be a forgery. But Jack Mercer had forged a document good enough to fool Silas Granger's own attorney, and he'd done it in less time than it took most men to brush their teeth. Who was this man? I don't believe this, Silas said, but his voice lacked conviction. I don't believe any of this. This is a trick, a confidence game. You're trying to steal what's rightfully mine. Ain't nothing rightful about buying a woman like she's a sack of feed corn, Jack said, and his voice had gone cold. And even if your contract was legitimate, which it ain't, because hers trumps yours by about a decade, you think I'm going to stand here and watch you whip my future wife? He turned to Dutch, who still had one meaty hand on Anna's shoulder, keeping her pressed against the post. Let her go, Jack said quietly. Dutch looked at Silas, who looked at Finch, who was studying the document again with increasing dismay. Mr. Granger, I really think we need to verify this before we proceed, Finch said carefully. If this document is legitimate, and I must say it certainly appears to be, then any action taken against Miss Whitfield could expose you to significant legal liability. Legal liability? Silas's laugh was bitter. What about my $1,500? What about the money I gave William Whitfield in good faith? That would be a matter for the courts to sort out, Finch said, but I strongly advise against any physical confrontation until we've established the legal standing of all parties involved. Anna saw Silas's hands clench into fists, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. For a moment she thought he might order Dutch to go ahead with the whipping anyway. Consequences be damned. The man wasn't used to being thwarted, and the rage coming off him was almost palpable. But Silas Granger hadn't gotten rich by being stupid. He'd gotten rich by being calculating, by knowing when to push and when to pull back and regroup. And right now, with his own attorney suggesting caution and a stranger who wore his gun like he knew how to use it standing between him and his target, pushing might prove costly. "Fine," he bit out. "Release her. But this isn't over, Mercer. Not by a long shot. I'm going to verify every word of that document, and if I find out you've lied to me, if I find out this is some kind of con, I will bury you so deep they'll need a divining rod to find your corpse." "You're welcome to try," Jack said pleasantly, "but you'll want to bring more than your pet gorilla here when you do." Dutch's scarred face flushed red, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip, but Silas grabbed his arm. "Not now," Silas hissed, then louder to the crowd. "This matter is postponed pending verification of Mr. Mercer's claims. Everyone back to your business. There's nothing more to see here." The crowd began to disperse, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as people realized they might still make it home in time for lunch. Anna could hear them whispering, could see them glancing back over their shoulders as they walked away. This would be the talk of the town for weeks. The wedding that wasn't, the stranger who appeared from nowhere, the confrontation with Silas Granger. Dutch untied Anna's wrists from the iron ring with rough movements, then shoved her away from the post hard enough that she stumbled. She would have fallen if Jack hadn't caught her, his hand steady on her shoulders. "Easy there," he murmured. "I've got you." Anna looked up into his face, really looked at him for the first time, and felt something shift in her chest. Up close, he was even more striking than she'd first thought. His face was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, despite the serious set of his mouth right now. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, and another traced a thin line along his jaw. His hair, what she could see of it under his hat, was dark brown with hints of sun-bleached gold at the ends. But it was his eyes that held her. They were searching her face with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. Not judged, not measured, just seen, acknowledged, recognized as a person rather than a problem to be solved or a possession to be claimed. "Thank you," she whispered, and was embarrassed to feel tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know who you are or why you did that, but thank you." "We should talk," Jack said quietly, glancing over his shoulder to where Silas still stood watching them with murder in his eyes. "But not here. Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" Anna's mind raced. Her father's house, but no, that was mortgaged to Silas, would probably be repossessed within days now that the wedding wasn't happening. Aunt Clara's place. But Clara lived in a boarding house with barely enough room for herself. And besides, Silas would look there first. The church. But Reverend Walsh, for all his good intentions, wouldn't be able to stand up to Silas if the man came demanding Anna be turned over. No, she admitted. "I have nowhere." Jack's jaw tightened. He seemed to come to a decision. "Then you'll come with me," he said. "I've got a place about 10 miles out of town, up in the foothills. Small spread, nothing fancy, but it's mine and it's defensible. You'll be safe there until we figure out what comes next." "I can't just," Anna started, then stopped. "Can't what? Go with a strange man?" She'd nearly married a man she despised to honor a debt she didn't owe. Going with a stranger who just saved her from a whipping seemed downright reasonable by comparison. "I don't even know you." "No, you don't," Jack agreed. "But you know him." He nodded toward Silas. "And you know what he'll do if you stay here. So the way I see it, you've got a choice. Take a chance on a stranger who just lied to save your life, or take your chances with a man who is willing to have you publicly whipped to force you to marry him. Your call." When he put it like that, it wasn't really a choice at all. "Let me get my things," Anna said. "We don't have time," Jack said gently. "Whatever you need, we'll figure it out later. Right now, we need to leave before Silas changes his mind or decides that document doesn't matter as much as his pride." He was right. Anna could see it in the way Silas was talking to Dutch and Finch, the three of them huddled together in intense conversation. The attorney kept shaking his head, but Dutch's hand never strayed far from his gun, and Silas's face was getting redder by the second. Okay, Anna said. Let's go. Jack led her to his horse, a sturdy-looking gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor despite all the excitement. He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down to pull Anna up behind him. Hold on tight, he instructed as she wrapped her arms around his waist. It's going to be a hard ride. The horse was already moving before Anna could respond, before she could second guess, before she could think about what she was doing, running away with a man she didn't know, based on a story that couldn't possibly be true, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. They rode down the main street of Prosperity at a fast trot that drew stares from everyone who hadn't yet gone inside. Anna kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to look at the faces watching her go. She could imagine what they were thinking, what they'd be saying later. There goes Anna Whitfield, running off with that stranger, shameless girl, probably deserves whatever happens to her. Let them think what they wanted. Whatever happened next, it had to be better than what she'd just escaped. They were passing the last building at the edge of town, the livery stable where old Pete Gunderson was standing in the doorway with his mouth hanging open, when a voice rang out behind them. Stop! Stop in the name of the law! Anna twisted around to see Sheriff Tom Brennan running toward them, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Behind him, Silas was shouting something, pointing at them, his face purple with rage. Go! Anna urged Jack. He's going to arrest us. Not today, he's not, Jack muttered. And then he did something with his heels, and the horse went from a trot to a full gallop so quickly that Anna nearly lost her grip. Wind whipped at her hair and torn dress as they thundered down the rutted road that led out of town. She could hear more shouting behind them, and when she dared another look back, she saw Sheriff Brennan had given up the chase, but Silas was climbing onto his own horse, Dutch, and two other men doing the same. They're following us, she shouted to Jack over the pounding of hooves and rush of wind. I see 'em, Jack called back. Hold on tighter. This is about to get interesting. The road ahead split, left toward the main ranch country, right toward the foothills and the mountains beyond. Jack took the right fork without slowing, and Anna felt her stomach drop as the horse's hooves skidded slightly on the loose gravel before finding purchase again. The terrain began to rise almost immediately, the flat valley floor giving way to rolling hills covered in scrub grass and scattered pines. The road, if it could even be called that, became rougher, less defined, more of a suggestion than an actual path. Anna risked another glance back and immediately wished she hadn't. Silas and his men were gaining on them, their horses fresher and probably faster than Jack's already tired gelding. We're not going to make it, she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice and failing completely. Sure we are, Jack said, but she could hear the strain in his voice, could feel the tension in his body as he urged the horse onward. Just need to make it to the ridge up ahead. Once we're in the trees, they won't be able to follow as easy. The ridge seemed impossibly far away, a dark line of pines that marked where the foothills gave way to serious mountain terrain. Between here and there lay open ground where they'd be completely exposed. A gunshot cracked through the air, and Anna screamed. The bullet kicked up dirt about 20 yards to their left, a warning shot, or maybe just bad aim at this distance. Damn it, Jack swore. Okay, change of plans. You know how to ride? What? I mean, yes, but good enough. Jack suddenly veered the horse toward a cluster of boulders off to the left of the path. The moment they were behind the rocks and out of direct line of sight, he reined in hard. Quick, get down! Anna slid off the horse, her legs nearly giving out when her feet hit the ground. The torn dress tangled around her ankles, and she had to grab onto Jack's stirrup to keep from falling. Jack dismounted in one smooth motion, already pulling his rifle from its saddle scabbard. Listen carefully, he said, his voice urgent but calm. There's a creek bed about 100 yards that way. He pointed east toward where Anna could now hear the faint sound of running water. Follow it upstream for about a quarter mile until you see a cabin. Just one room, kind of run-down looking, but it's solid. Wait for me there. If I'm not back by sundown. He hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Take this. Follow the creek all the way up into the mountains. There's a mining camp about 2 days' ride north of here. Tell them Jack Mercer sent you. Ask for a man named Charlie Redbone. He'll help you get somewhere safe. Wait, you're not coming with me? Anna felt ice slide down her spine. What are you going to do? Buy you time to get away, Jack said simply. Those men back there, they're not going to stop just because we're hiding behind some rocks. But they might stop if I give them something else to think about. You can't fight 4 men alone, Anna protested. I don't intend to fight them, Jack said. I intend to talk to them. Maybe convince them that chasing you isn't worth the trouble. But if that doesn't work, he patted the rifle, then I'll do what I have to do. More hoofbeats, closer now, voices calling out, though Anna couldn't make out the words. Go, Jack urged. Please. Everything I just did will be for nothing if they catch you now. Anna wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she wasn't leaving him to face this alone, wanted to do something other than run away like a coward. But she also wasn't stupid enough to think she'd be any help in a fight. If anything, she'd be a liability, something Jack would have to protect, while also trying to keep himself alive. Thank you, she said again, inadequately. For everything. Thank me by getting to that cabin in one piece, Jack said. He was already moving toward the edge of the boulders, rifle in hand. Now go! Anna went. She ran toward the sound of water, her bare feet protesting with every step, the torn dress threatening to trip her with every stride. Behind her, she heard Jack's voice ring out. That's far enough, gentlemen. I think we need to have ourselves a conversation. Then the sound of gunfire, not the single crack of a warning shot, but the rapid bark of multiple weapons fired in anger. Anna stumbled, nearly fell, caught herself on a tree trunk and forced herself to keep moving. Tears blurred her vision, whether from fear or exhaustion or guilt at leaving Jack to face that alone. She didn't know and didn't have time to analyze. The creek bed appeared suddenly, a narrow channel carved through rock and dirt with water running clear and fast over smooth stones. Anna splashed into it without hesitation, the cold water shocking against her abraded feet, but also somehow bracing. She turned upstream and started running again, following the winding course as it led deeper into the foothills. The gunfire behind her had stopped. She didn't know if that was good or bad, didn't know if Jack was alive or dead, captured or victorious. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, had to trust that this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere had known what he was doing when he sent her this way. The creek led through a small canyon, the walls rising up on either side to create a narrow channel where the afternoon sun barely penetrated. Anna's breath came in ragged gasps, her legs screaming in protest, her torn dress soaked from repeated trips into the water when the banks became too steep to navigate. A quarter mile, he'd said. It felt like 10 miles. It felt like 100. And then, around a bend where the canyon opened up into a small meadow, she saw it. A cabin, just like Jack had described. One room, weathered logs, a stone chimney on one end, and a rickety porch on the front. It looked like it might fall over if a strong wind came through, but it was standing, and the door was intact, and it was the most beautiful thing Anna had ever seen. She stumbled up onto the porch, her legs finally giving out as she reached the door. It wasn't locked. Out here, nothing was locked because there was no one around to steal anything, and she practically fell inside. The interior was dim and dusty, with the musty smell of a place that hadn't been occupied in months. But there was a bed frame with an old straw mattress, a table with 2 chairs, a fireplace with a few logs stacked beside it, and a single window with shutters that could be closed against the weather or against people who might be looking. Anna closed the door behind her, shot the bolt, just a simple wooden bar, but it was something, and then sank down onto the floor with her back against the wall. Only then, in the silence of that dusty cabin, did she finally let herself break down and cry. She cried for her father, dead and buried, who'd made such terrible choices trying to save his family that he'd nearly destroyed them instead. She cried for her mother, gone before any of this started, spared at least from seeing what her daughter's life had become. She cried for herself, for the wedding that wasn't, for the future she'd tried so hard to avoid, and the different future she'd just run toward without any idea of what it might hold. And she cried for Jack Mercer, a stranger who'd stepped between her and a whip without hesitation, who'd forged a document and lied to a dangerous man to save her, who was right now possibly dying or dead because he'd chosen to help someone he didn't even know. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky. The creek burbled past, indifferent to human drama. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, and another answered. And Anna Whitfield sat in that cabin, waiting for a man she'd met less than an hour ago, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore, that he would somehow make it back alive. Because if he didn't, she had no idea what she would do next. The shadows had grown long across the cabin floor by the time Anna heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She'd spent the last several hours in a state of suspended terror, jumping at every sound, peering through the cracks in the shutters at every bird that flew past, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The small leather pouch Jack had given her sat on the table, still unopened. She'd told herself she wouldn't touch it unless she absolutely had to, as if leaving it sealed would somehow guarantee his return. Now someone was coming, and she had no way of knowing if it was friend or foe. Anna pressed herself against the wall beside the window, trying to see out without being seen. The angle was wrong, and all she could make out was a dark shape moving through the trees along the creek bed. One rider, at least. Maybe more behind. The hoofbeats stopped. A long moment of silence followed, broken only by the sound of the creek and Anna's own ragged breathing. "Anna?" Jack's voice, rough and tired but unmistakably alive. "You in there?" Relief hit her so hard she actually swayed on her feet. She fumbled with the wooden bolt, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to lift it clear. Then she yanked the door open, and there he was, still mounted on his brown gelding, looking exhausted and dusty and absolutely beautiful. "You're alive," she breathed. "Surprised me too," Jack said with a tired smile. He swung down from the saddle with less grace than before, and Anna noticed he was favoring his left side. Silas's boys aren't exactly crack shots, turns out. Lots of noise, not much accuracy. "You're hurt." Anna saw it now, a dark stain spreading across his shirt just above his belt on the left side. "Oh God, you're bleeding." "Just a graze," Jack said, but his face was pale beneath the sun-weathered tan. "Bullet caught me when I was getting back to the horse. I've had worse." He led the horse toward a small lean-to structure Anna hadn't noticed before, partially hidden by overgrown brush on the side of the cabin. His movements were stiff, careful, like every step cost him. "Did they follow you?" Anna asked, scanning the trees nervously. "Not past the ridge," Jack said. He was unsaddling the horse with one hand, the other pressed against his side. "I convinced them that chasing us further into the mountains wasn't worth the trouble. Or more specifically, I convinced Dutch Kemper that the next bullet wouldn't just graze him, it would do considerably more damage to his anatomy." "You shot Dutch?" "Nicked his ear," Jack said. "Man squeals like a pig when he's scared. Who knew?" He finished with the saddle and started to lift it, then winced and had to set it back down. "Damn." "Let me help you." Anna moved forward, taking the saddle from him despite his protest. It was heavier than she'd expected, but she managed to hoist it onto the wooden rack inside the lean-to. "Now let me see that wound." "It's nothing, really. I've seen nothing kill men before." Anna cut him off. "My mother was sick for 2 years before she died. I learned a thing or two about tending wounds and dealing with fever. So unless you want to risk infection and spend the next week delirious while I try to keep you alive with prayer and hope, you'll let me take a look at it." Jack studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're not quite what I expected, Anna Whitfield." "What did you expect?" "Honestly? I didn't think past getting you away from that whipping post." He turned toward the cabin. "Didn't really have time to form expectations." Inside, Anna directed Jack to sit at the table while she assessed what resources they had to work with. The cabin was more equipped than she'd initially realized. There were supplies tucked away in a wooden chest in the corner, including a tin of matches, some candles, a battered coffee pot, and most importantly, a bottle of whiskey and some relatively clean cloth that might have once been a shirt. "You've been here before," she said, more statement than question. "Used to belong to a prospector named Harvey Mills," Jack said. He was breathing shallowly, trying not to move his torso too much. "Met him about 3 years back when I first came to Colorado. He let me use the place whenever I needed somewhere quiet to hole up. When he died last winter, just old age, nothing dramatic, he left it to me in his will, such as it was." Anna brought the whiskey and cloth to the table, along with one of the candles she'd lit to provide better light. "I'm going to need you to take off your shirt." Jack complied, unbuttoning with fumbling fingers and carefully shrugging out of the blood-stained fabric. Anna had to look away for a moment, Not from the wound, but from the sudden awareness that she was alone in a cabin with a half-naked man she'd met only hours ago. The impropriety of it would have sent Aunt Clara into vapors. But Aunt Clara wasn't here, and propriety was a luxury Anna could no longer afford. She forced herself to focus on the wound. He'd been right. It was a graze, the bullet having cut a furrow across his left side just above his hip. Not deep enough to have hit anything vital, but deep enough to bleed freely and leave a nasty wound that would need cleaning and binding. "This is going to hurt," she warned, uncorking the whiskey bottle. "Wouldn't be medicine if it didn't," Jack said, but his knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of the table. Anna poured the whiskey directly onto the wound. Jack made a sound that was half gasp, half curse, every muscle in his torso going rigid. She worked quickly, using the cleanest part of the cloth to wipe away blood and debris, then poured more whiskey to make sure it was thoroughly cleaned. "You trying to kill me or save me?" Jack managed through gritted teeth. "Save you," Anna said, "though I can see how you might be confused." She tore strips from the cloth and began wrapping them around his torso, binding the wound tight enough to stop the bleeding, but not so tight as to restrict his breathing. "My mother used to say that if medicine didn't make you want to curse God and all his angels, it probably wasn't doing its job." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Anna tied off the bandage and sat back, studying her work. It wasn't pretty, but it would do. "She was also kind and patient and everything I'm not. She would have known what to do in this situation. She would have had a plan." "You got yourself here in one piece," Jack pointed out. "That's more plan than most people manage when they're running for their lives." Anna moved to the fireplace, needing something to do with her hands. There was kindling in a small box beside the hearth, and she began arranging it mechanically, the way her mother had taught her years ago. Small pieces first, then larger, building up a structure that would catch easily and burn steadily. "I need to ask you something," she said, not looking at him. "That document you showed Silas, the contract between your father and mine, that was a forgery, wasn't it?" The silence stretched long enough that Anna finally turned to look at him. Jack was pulling his ruined shirt back on, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Does it matter?" he asked finally. "It matters to me." Anna struck a match and touched it to the kindling. The flames caught immediately, eager and bright. "I need to know if I'm running from one lie into another." Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames grow. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "The document was real," he said. "The signatures were real. William Whitfield and Jacob Mercer Sr., my father, really did make an arrangement about 15 years ago. But it wasn't about you." Anna turned fully to face him now. "I don't understand." "My father and yours were friends, like I said. Partners, actually, back in the early days. They came west together in the 50s during the gold rush, worked claims together, watched each other's backs when things got rough. And when they both decided to settle down and try their hand at ranching instead of prospecting, they made a pact. If my father had a son and your father had a daughter, they'd unite the families, make sure the partnership continued into the next generation." "But you said—" "I said the document was real," Jack interrupted gently. "And it was. But William Whitfield never had a daughter, at least not by the time my father died. The contract was drawn up in 1863, when your father was newly married and my mother was pregnant with me. But your mother didn't have you until 1856, 3 years later. By then, my father was dead, killed by Comanche raiders while trying to protect a wagon train, and your father had moved to a different territory entirely. They lost touch." Anna felt the pieces clicking into place, and the picture they formed made her feel slightly sick. "So that document doesn't actually apply to me at all?" "Technically, no." Jack met her eyes steadily. "But it was real enough to convince Silas and his attorney, at least temporarily. Real enough to buy you time to get away." "You forged the date," Anna said, seeing it now. "The document was real, but you changed the year to make it look like the arrangement was made after I was born." "Changed a 6 to a 3, Jack confirmed. "Not difficult if you've got steady hands and the right kind of ink. I've had that document for years, carried it with me as a sort of keepsake from my father. Never thought I'd actually use it for anything, but when I rode into Prosperity this morning and saw what was happening—" He shook his head. "I had to do something." "Why?" The question burst out of Anna before she could stop it. Why would you risk your life for someone you don't even know? Why would you lie and forge documents and get shot defending a complete stranger? Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, seeing something Anna couldn't see. Because 3 years ago, in a town not much different from Prosperity, I watched a man get lynched for a crime he didn't commit, he said finally. He was a drifter. Nobody knew him. Nobody spoke up for him. The town marshal was corrupt. The local cattle baron wanted someone to blame for his missing stock, and this poor bastard was convenient. They strung him up from an oak tree in the center of town, and I stood there with everyone else and watched it happen. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Anna could hear the weight behind it. I told myself it wasn't my business. Told myself I was just passing through, that getting involved would only cause trouble, that one man couldn't make a difference anyway. I told myself a lot of things, and then they kicked the barrel out from under his feet, and I watched him die, knowing I could have at least tried to stop it, knowing I didn't. Jack, found out 2 weeks later that they caught the real rustlers, Jack continued. The man they hanged was innocent, just unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and nobody cared enough to give him the benefit of the doubt. He died because people like me chose to do nothing. He looked at Anna now, and his eyes were haunted. So when I rode into Prosperity this morning and saw you at that whipping post, saw the look on your face and the whip in Dutch Kemper's hand, I knew I had a choice. I could ride on by and tell myself it wasn't my business. Or I could do something, even if it was stupid, even if it was reckless, even if it meant lying and forging documents and probably getting myself killed. I chose to do something, and I'd make the same choice again. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Anna felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but they were different tears this time. Not fear or despair, but something warmer, something that felt almost like hope. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing to do something, for choosing me." "Don't thank me yet," Jack said with a tired smile. "We're not out of this mess by a long shot. Silas Granger isn't the kind of man who lets things go. That document bought us time, but once he figures out the truth, and he will figure it out, he's going to come after us with everything he's got." What do? For tonight, we rest, get some sleep, let my side heal up a bit, figure out our next move in the morning when we've both got clearer heads. Jack stood up carefully, testing his wound. "There's only one bed, but I can sleep on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," Anna cut him off. "You're injured. You take the bed, I'll be fine by the fire." "Anna, I'm not arguing about this," she said firmly. "You got shot protecting me. The least I can do is let you sleep somewhere comfortable." Jack looked like he wanted to argue, but another wince of pain seemed to decide him. "Just for tonight. Tomorrow we'll work out something more appropriate." He moved to the bed and lowered himself onto the straw mattress with a suppressed groan. Anna turned her attention back to the fire, feeding it larger pieces of wood now that the initial flames had caught well. The sun was setting outside, painting the walls with streaks of orange and gold that faded slowly to purple and then to darkness. "Anna?" Jack's voice was drowsy, pain and exhaustion catching up with him. "Yes?" "That thing I said earlier about you being already taken. I know it was just a lie to get Silas off your back, but..." He paused. "If you want to make it true, I meant what I said. About taking you somewhere safe, about making sure you're provided for. I'm not a rich man, and I'm not offering you anything fancy. But I've got a small ranch up in Montana, about 300 acres with good grazing and a decent house. Nothing like what Silas could give you, but it's honest and it's mine, and you'd be safe there." Anna turned to look at him, but his eyes were already closed, his breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. She wasn't sure if he'd even heard himself make the offer, or if he'd remember it in the morning. She sat by the fire long into the night, watching the flames dance and thinking about choices. About her father's choices that had led to this mess. About Jack's choice to step in when he didn't have to. About the choice she'd made to run with a stranger rather than submit to a man she despised. And about the choice Jack had just offered her, delivered in that drowsy voice that might or might not remember by morning. A chance at a different kind of life. Not the one she'd planned, certainly not the one her father had sold her into, but something else entirely. Something that might even be good if she was brave enough to take it. Outside, the night settled in around the little cabin. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The creek burbled its endless song, and Anna Whitfield, who 12 hours ago had been standing at a whipping post in a torn wedding dress, fell asleep by the fire in a stranger's cabin and dreamed of Montana. She woke to the sound of voices outside. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure of where she was or why she was sleeping on a hard floor instead of in her own bed. Then memory crashed back. The whipping post, Jack Mercer, the desperate ride into the foothills, and she was instantly awake, her heart pounding. The voices were low, male, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. At least 3 of them, maybe more, and they were close, probably right outside the cabin. Anna looked toward the bed. Jack was awake too, sitting up carefully with one hand pressed against his bandaged side. He held a finger to his lips, then pointed to the corner of the cabin where his gun belt hung on a peg. Anna nodded and moved as quietly as she could to retrieve it, bringing it to him along with the rifle that had been leaning against the wall. "Sure this is the place?" one of the voices was saying. "It's the only structure for 5 miles," another voice responded, and Anna's blood went cold. She recognized that voice. Dutch Kemper. If they came this way, they're either here or they kept going into the high country, and looking at the tracks, I'd say they stopped. "Could have moved on by now," the first voice argued. "On foot? With her in a torn dress and him bleeding? No way they got far." That was Dutch again. "Besides, I saw smoke from the chimney earlier. Someone's here." Jack had strapped on his gun belt and was checking his rifle, making sure it was loaded. He caught Anna's eye and gestured for her to get behind him, to put the bed between her and the door. She shook her head stubbornly. If there was going to be a fight, she wasn't going to cower in the corner like a frightened child. A heavy knock sounded on the door, making Anna jump despite herself. "Jack Mercer!" Dutch's voice boomed. "I know you're in there, you and the girl. Come on out peaceful-like, and nobody else has to get hurt." Jack moved to the window, careful to stay out of direct line of sight as he peered through a crack in the shutters. He held up 4 fingers to Anna, then mouthed something she couldn't quite make out. "You hear me in there?" Dutch called. "Mr. Granger. He's willing to be reasonable about this. He knows you were just trying to help the girl, but that contract of yours? Our attorney did some checking. Seems there's some questions about the dates, about whether it actually applies to Anna Whitfield at all. So we're going to need to sort this out proper-like. But first, you got to come out." "And if we don't?" Jack called back. There was a pause, then Dutch's voice came again, harder this time. "Then we come in. And trust me, friend, you don't want that. You're outnumbered and outgunned. You might take 1 or 2 of us down, but you won't get all 4. And when we're done with you, the girl goes back to Mr. Granger anyway, so why not make it easy on everyone?" Jack looked at Anna. "The window," he mouthed, pointing to the shuttered opening on the back wall. "Can you climb through?" Anna moved to check. The window was small, barely 2 feet square, but she thought she could manage it. The bigger problem was what came after. Dutch had said 4 men, which meant at least 1 would probably be watching the back of the cabin. "I'm giving you 1 minute to decide," Dutch called. "After that, we're coming in. And Mercer? I owe you for my ear. I plan to collect that debt personally." Jack moved closer to Anna, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a trail that follows the creek east from here. About half a mile down, there's a fork. You want to take the left branch, not the right. The left will take you over the ridge and down toward the main road to Denver. The right just leads deeper into the mountains. You understand?" "I'm not leaving you," Anna whispered back. "You are, because there's no other choice," Jack said firmly. 4 men with guns against 1 man with a rifle and a girl with no weapon? Those aren't odds we can win. But if you can get away, if you can get to Denver, you can— 30 seconds, Dutch shouted. A plan was forming in Anna's mind, reckless and probably stupid, but better than anything else she could come up with. "Give me your hat," she said. "What?" "Your hat, quickly!" Anna grabbed it off his head before he could protest. She also snatched his jacket from where it hung on the back of the chair. Moving fast, she bundled the jacket around one of the pillows from the bed, jamming the hat on top to create a rough approximation of a person's head and shoulders. Jack understood immediately. "You're crazy." "You got a better idea?" Anna positioned herself by the window, her hands on the shutters ready to push them open. "When I throw this out, they'll think one of us is making a run for it. When they move to chase, you go out the door and get the drop on them." That's assuming they don't just shoot the decoy the moment it appears, Jack pointed out. Then we'll hope they're curious enough to hesitate for a few seconds. Anna's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. On 3? Time's up, Dutch roared. Last chance! 1, Anna counted. The sound of footsteps approaching the door, heavy boots on wooden planks. 2, the door handle rattled. Someone testing to see if it was barred. 3. Anna shoved the shutters open and hurled the bundled jacket and hat out into the gathering dawn. At the same moment, Jack yanked open the front door and stepped out, rifle leveled. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Dutch and 2 other men were at the front door, their attention snapping between Jack's rifle and the dummy sailing out the window. A 4th man, Anna caught a glimpse of him through the open door, had been positioned at the corner of the cabin and was turning toward the window, gun drawn. Drop the guns, Jack commanded. Now! But these were men who worked for Silas Granger, which meant they were accustomed to doing the threatening, not being threatened. Dutch's hand went for his pistol even as Jack's rifle tracked toward him. Don't! Jack shouted. Dutch didn't listen. His gun cleared leather just as Jack fired. The rifle's report was deafening in the morning air. Dutch went down with a scream, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck. The other 2 men at the door scrambled for cover, one diving behind a tree and the other dropping flat and rolling toward the lean-to. Anna ducked back from the window as gunfire erupted, the 4th man shooting at where he'd seen movement. Bullets punched through the cabin's log walls, sending splinters flying. She hit the floor and stayed there, her ears ringing from the noise. More shots from outside, the sharp crack of pistols answered by the deeper boom of Jack's rifle. Someone was yelling, though Anna couldn't make out the words over the chaos. Glass shattered. One of the men had shot out the window she'd thrown the dummy through. Then sudden silence, broken only by Dutch's groaning and the sound of running feet fading into the distance. Anna! Jack's voice. Stay down! She heard him moving, the sound of his boots on the porch. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, still holding his rifle, breathing hard. Blood had seeped through his bandage, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. They ran? Anna asked, slowly getting to her feet. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline making her feel simultaneously energized and exhausted. 2 of them did, Jack said. He was watching the trees carefully, rifle still at the ready. Dutch is down and the 4th one, the one who was watching the back. He's not getting up again. It took a moment for Anna to understand what he was saying. When she did, her stomach lurched. You killed him. Didn't have much choice in the matter, Jack said quietly. His face was grim. He was shooting at you. I ended the threat. Outside, Dutch was still groaning, curled up on the ground with his hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. Jack walked over to him and kicked his gun away, then grabbed him by his good arm and hauled him roughly to his feet. Where's Silas? Jack demanded. Go to hell, Dutch spat, but the words lacked conviction. He was pale, his face sheened with sweat. I can make this easy or hard, Jack said conversationally. Easy as I bind up that shoulder, give you a horse, and send you back to town with a message for your boss. Hard as I leave you here bleeding and let you explain to him why you failed. Your choice. Dutch glared at him with pure hatred, but he was also a practical man. He's back in town, he admitted. Didn't come himself because he wanted distance from whatever happened here. Sent us to bring her back. Quietly if possible. And if not quietly? Then however we could manage it. Dutch looked at Anna with something that might have been pity. Girl, you got no idea the hornet's nest you kicked over. Mr. Granger, he's not just angry anymore. He's humiliated. And a man like him, humiliation is worse than theft, worse than murder. He won't stop until he's got you back under his thumb, even if it's just so he can make an example of you. He can try, Anna said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Jack used some of the rope from the lean-to tie Dutch's hands, loosely, so as not to cut off circulation to his wounded shoulder, but firmly enough that he wouldn't be able to free himself easily. Then he brought Dutch's horse around and helped the injured man mount up. You tell Silas something for me, Jack said, his hand on the horse's bridle. You tell him that Anna Whitfield is under my protection now. You tell him that if he sends any more men after us, they'll end up like your friend over there. He jerked his head toward where the 4th man lay still. And you tell him that if he's smart, he'll cut his losses and find himself a new bride. One who might actually want to marry him. Dutch looked down at him with something like respect despite the situation. "You're a dead man, Mercer. You just don't know it yet. Mr. Granger has money and men and connections. He'll hunt you to the ends of the earth if he has to." "Let him try," Jack said, and slapped the horse on the rump, sending it trotting down the trail with Dutch swaying unsteadily in the saddle. When the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely, Jack finally lowered his rifle. His shoulders slumped, and Anna saw him wince as the movement pulled at his wounded side. "You're bleeding again," she said, moving toward him. "I've been bleeding again since I got up this morning," Jack said wearily. "But you're right. We should probably check it before it gets worse." They went back inside the cabin, carefully avoiding looking at the body that lay crumpled near the back corner. Anna would have to deal with the reality of what had happened eventually. A man had died because of her, because Jack had protected her. But right now she needed to focus on keeping Jack alive. His bandage was soaked through, and when Anna carefully unwrapped it, she saw that several of the stitches had pulled loose. The wound was bleeding steadily, though not at the alarming rate that would suggest an artery had been hit. "This needs to be sewn up properly," she said. "That whiskey treatment last night was emergency care, but you need actual stitches or this isn't going to heal right." "You know how to stitch?" Jack asked. "I've sewn up my share of cuts and gashes over the years," Anna said. "My father was always having accidents on the farm. Never anything this big, but the principle should be the same." She found a sewing needle in the small chest of supplies. Harvey Mills had apparently been prepared for most emergencies, and used the remaining whiskey to sterilize it as best she could. Thread was more of a challenge, but Jack produced some fishing line from his saddlebag that would serve. "This is really going to hurt," Anna warned. "Just do it quick," Jack said. He'd braced himself against the table, his face already pale from blood loss. "And maybe talk while you work. Give me something to focus on besides the pain." Anna threaded the needle with trembling fingers. "What do you want me to talk about?" "Anything. Tell me about your life before all this. Before Silas." Anna pressed the needle through the edge of Jack's torn flesh, and he sucked in a sharp breath but didn't cry out. She pulled the thread through carefully, then made another stitch. "My life before this was quiet," she said, trying to keep her voice steady and conversational despite the gruesome work. "Almost boring, actually. I helped my father run the farm after my mother died. We grew corn and potatoes, kept some chickens, had a milk cow. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Or at least it felt like ours, until I found out how much debt my father had accumulated." Another stitch. Jack's knuckles were white where he gripped the table. "He tried to hide it from me," Anna continued. "Tried to protect me from knowing how bad things had gotten. The debts were from my mother's illness. The doctors, the medicines that didn't work, the specialists he brought in from Denver who charged a fortune and couldn't do anything except confirm she was dying. He would have sold everything we owned to save her if he could have, and when she died anyway, he was left with nothing except bills and guilt." "That's when Silas made his offer," Jack said through gritted teeth. "That's when Silas saw an opportunity," Anna corrected. She was halfway through now, the wound slowly closing under her inexpert stitching. "He showed up one day with his fancy clothes and his polite words and his offer to help our family. $1,500 to clear all the debts, plus a monthly stipend to keep the farm running, and all my father had to do was promise that I'd marry him within the year." "And your father agreed?" "My father was dying," Anna said softly. "The consumption had already taken hold by then, though he tried to hide that too. He knew he wouldn't be around to take care of me, and he thought Silas's offer was the best way to ensure I'd be provided for after he was gone. He had it as selling me. He saw it as securing my future." The last stitch went in, and Anna tied it off carefully. She'd done as good a job as she could, though the scarring would be significant, but the wound was closed and the bleeding had stopped, and that was what mattered. "There," she said. "All done." Jack let out a long breath and carefully straightened up. "Thank you. For fixing me up, and for—" He gestured vaguely. "Everything else. You saved my life," Anna said simply. "Twice now. It's the least I can do." They spent the rest of the morning preparing to leave. It was clear they couldn't stay at the cabin. Silas would send more men, and next time they'd come in greater numbers and better prepared. Jack wanted to head for his ranch in Montana, but that was weeks of travel even under ideal conditions, and with his injury and the likelihood of pursuit, it would be even longer. "We need somewhere closer," Anna said. Somewhere we can hole up for a week or two, let you heal properly, and plan our next move. I know a place, Jack said slowly. It's about 3 days' ride from here, up in the high country. An old mining camp that got abandoned when the silver played out. There's still a few buildings standing, and it's remote enough that nobody goes there unless they're specifically looking for it. Will Silas think to look there? If he does, it won't be right away, Jack said. He'll expect us to run for civilization, Denver or maybe Santa Fe. He won't expect us to head deeper into the wilderness. It was as good a plan as any. They packed what supplies they could carry, the whiskey, the remaining food stores, blankets, Jack's spare ammunition, and loaded everything onto the horse. Jack insisted on burying the man he'd killed before they left, a grim task that took most of the afternoon. Anna helped as much as she could, though her torn dress made physical labor difficult. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finally set out, leaving the cabin and its ghosts behind. Jack rode the horse while Anna walked beside, following the creek trail that would eventually lead them up into the mountains proper. You never asked me, Jack said after they'd been traveling for about an hour. Asked you what? Whether I regretted it, stepping in back in prosperity, getting involved in all this mess. Anna was quiet for a moment, watching the way the evening light turned the creek water to gold. Do you? She finally asked. No, Jack said without hesitation. Though I'll admit there were a few minutes this morning when Dutch and his boys had us pinned down that I questioned my decision-making skills. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty of what came next, Anna found herself smiling. Your decision-making skills saved my life. I'd say they're pretty sound. We'll see, Jack said. Ask me again when we're not being hunted by an angry cattle baron with unlimited resources and a grudge. They traveled into the gathering dusk, following trails that Jack seemed to know by instinct, climbing steadily into country that grew more rugged and beautiful with each passing mile. And as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Anna found herself thinking about Jack's offer from the night before, about Montana and a small ranch and a life that might possibly be good. She still didn't know if he'd meant it or if he'd remember saying it. But as she walked beside his horse through the Colorado wilderness, running from one danger toward an uncertain future, she realized something that surprised her. She was actually starting to hope he had. The abandoned mining camp materialized out of the mountain mist like something from a fever dream on the afternoon of their third day of travel. Anna had begun to wonder if Jack had been delirious when he'd mentioned it, if perhaps the wound and blood loss had confused his memories, and they were actually chasing a ghost. But there it stood, a collection of weathered structures clinging to the mountainside like the last stubborn teeth in an old man's mouth. They'd spent 2 nights on the trail, sleeping under the stars with Jack's saddle blanket shared between them and the horse hobbled nearby. Anna's feet were a mass of blisters and cuts despite the spare boots Jack had managed to scrounge from his saddlebags. Men's boots, too large and rubbing in all the wrong places, but infinitely better than nothing. Her wedding dress was beyond salvaging now, torn and stained and barely decent. She'd tied the worst of the rips with strips of cloth, creating something that resembled clothing only in the most generous interpretation of the term. Jack hadn't fared much better. His wound had held together through Anna's stitching, but the constant movement and lack of proper rest had taken their toll. His face was drawn and pale, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of pain endured in silence. He'd insisted on taking turns keeping watch each night, refusing to let Anna shoulder the full burden despite her protests that he needed to heal. There, Jack said now, pointing to what had probably once been the main shaft entrance, now boarded up and bearing a faded warning sign about unstable timbers. The buildings around the shaft are mostly collapsed, but there's a row of cabins on the far side that the miners used. At least 3 of them were still standing last time I came through here. They guided the horse carefully down the slope toward the camp, picking their way through scattered debris and the skeletal remains of mining equipment left to rust in the mountain weather. Anna could see the cabins Jack had mentioned, a row of 5 structures built into the hillside in a way that used the natural slope for shelter against the wind. 2 had lost their roofs entirely, their walls open to the sky. A third was listing badly to one side, as if it might collapse at any moment. But the last 2 looked relatively intact, their doors still on hinges and their windows merely broken rather than completely gone. "Take your pick," Jack said, dismounting with a barely suppressed groan. He tried to hide how much the movement cost him, but Anna saw the way his hand immediately went to his side, the way he had to lean against the horse for a moment to steady himself. "The one on the end," Anna decided, choosing the cabin furthest from the trail. "Better view of anyone approaching, and it's got that rock outcropping behind it that might provide extra shelter." They approached cautiously, Jack drawing his pistol despite his obvious exhaustion. But the cabin was empty except for a family of pack rats that scattered at their intrusion. The interior was a single room, perhaps 12 feet square, with a fireplace made of stacked stone, a wooden sleeping platform built into one corner, and not much else. Someone had left behind a battered chair with one leg shorter than the others, a tin cup with a hole rusted through the bottom, and what might have once been a shirt but was now just rags. It was, without question, the most beautiful thing Anna had seen in 3 days. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Compared to sleeping on the ground with one eye open for predators and pursuers, this felt like a palace. Jack managed a tired smile. "Glad you approve. Though I have to say, your standards have dropped considerably since we met." "My standards have always been flexible," Anna said. She was already moving around the space, assessing what needed to be done. "I grew up on a farm, remember? I've shoveled manure and slept in a barn when the house was too cold to heat in winter. This is luxury." They spent what remained of the afternoon making the cabin habitable. Jack tended to the horse, finding a sheltered spot where the animal could graze on the tough mountain grass that grew in patches between the rocks. Anna swept out the worst of the debris with a makeshift broom fashioned from pine branches, drove out the remaining pack rats with a stick, and tested the fireplace to make sure the chimney would draw properly. By the time the sun touched the western peaks, they had a fire going, the horse settled, and enough space cleared that they could at least lie down without sharing quarters with rodents and rubble. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe, and right now that was all that mattered. "We should eat," Anna said, assessing their supplies. They'd brought dried beef, some hardtack that was only slightly less tough than leather, coffee, and a few tins of beans. Not exactly a feast, but it would keep them alive. "And then you need to rest, really rest, not this half-sleeping, one-eye-open thing you've been doing." "We need to keep watch." "I'll keep watch," Anna interrupted firmly. "You've been doing it for 2 nights straight and you're about to fall over. I can wake you if anything happens." Jack looked like he wanted to argue, but another wince of pain seemed to change his mind. "Just for a few hours," he conceded. "Then we switch." Anna heated water from the stream that ran behind the camp, using it to rehydrate some of the beef and soften the hardtack enough that they could eat it without breaking teeth. They ate in companionable silence, too tired for conversation, the crackling fire, and the distant sound of the stream the only music they needed. When the meal was finished, Jack moved to the sleeping platform and lowered himself onto it with careful movements. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of exhaustion finally given permission to take over. Anna sat by the fire and watched him sleep. In repose, some of the hardness left his face, making him look younger than she'd initially thought. 30, maybe, or close to it. Young enough to still have most of his life ahead of him, old enough to have accumulated the scars and stories that made a man interesting. She found herself wondering about those stories, about what had brought him to Colorado, about what his life had been like before fate put him on that road into prosperity at exactly the right moment to see a woman about to be whipped. The night deepened around them. Anna fed the fire and kept watch, listening to the sounds of the mountains settling into darkness. An owl called somewhere in the distance. The stream murmured its endless conversation with the stones. And gradually, despite her best intentions, her own exhaustion began to pull at her, making her eyes heavy and her thoughts slow. She was jerking awake from a momentary doze when she heard it, the sound of a horse somewhere down the trail, moving slowly, carefully, as if trying not to be heard. Anna was on her feet instantly, her heart hammering. She moved to Jack's side and shook him gently but urgently. "Jack, Jack, wake up! Someone's coming!" He was awake immediately, years of frontier living having trained him to go from sleep to full alertness in seconds. He sat up, reaching for his gun belt, listening. The sound came again, clearer now, Definitely a horse, definitely approaching the camp. And from the careful pace, whoever was riding didn't want to announce their arrival. "How many?" Jack whispered. "I only hear one horse," Anna said. "But I can't be sure." Jack moved to the window, staying back from the opening so he wouldn't be silhouetted against the firelight. Anna doused the fire quickly, using dirt from the floor to smother the flames until the cabin was dark, except for the faint starlight filtering through the broken window. They waited in tense silence. The hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped. A long pause followed, during which Anna could hear nothing but her own heartbeat and Jack's breathing beside her. Then a voice called out, female and frightened, "Please, is anyone there? I need help!" Anna and Jack exchanged looks in the darkness. A woman, out here alone, asking for help. It could be genuine, or it could be a trap, bait sent by Silas to draw them out. "Please," the voice came again. "My horse threw me and I'm hurt. I saw your fire. I just need somewhere safe for the night." Jack moved to the door, his gun drawn, but held low and ready. "Step into the moonlight where I can see you," he called. "Slowly, with your hands where I can see them." There was movement in the darkness, and then a figure emerged into the open space before the cabin. Anna could make out the silhouette of a woman, shorter than herself, with her hands raised to show they were empty. She was limping badly, favoring her left leg. "I'm not armed," the woman said. "I'm alone. I just need help." Jack studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Anna, get the fire going again, and keep my rifle handy, just in case." He raised his voice. "Come ahead slowly. Any sudden moves and I will shoot you. Understand?" "I understand," the woman said. She limped toward the cabin, and as she came closer and Anna got the fire relit, they could finally see her clearly. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come partially undone. Her clothes were practical riding gear, split skirts, a man's shirt, boots, but they were well made, expensive. Her face was smudged with dirt and streaked with tears, and she was indeed limping heavily. "What happened?" Anna asked, helping the woman to the rickety chair once she'd made it inside. "I was traveling to Denver from a mining camp further north," the woman said. Her voice carried the educated accent of someone who'd grown up with money and schooling. "My escort got into a fight with some men over a card game 2 nights ago. Shot dead, both of them, and the men who killed them took the money I'd paid for protection. I've been riding alone since then, trying to reach civilization before my supplies ran out. But this afternoon my horse spooked at something, a snake, I think, and threw me. I think I twisted my ankle when I landed." She looked between Anna and Jack with obvious fear and hope warring in her expression. "I'm sorry to intrude. I know you probably don't want strangers showing up, but I didn't know what else to do." Anna knelt to examine the woman's ankle. It was swollen and already turning purple, though whether it was broken or just badly sprained was hard to tell. "We need to get this boot off before the swelling gets worse." "Wait," Jack said. He hadn't lowered his gun. "You said you were coming from a mining camp. Which one?" "Silver Creek," the woman said. "About 40 miles north of here. Do you know it?" "I know of it," Jack said carefully, "and I know it played out 6 months ago. Most of the miners moved on to better prospects. So what were you doing there?" The woman's face flushed. "I was working there. At the saloon." Understanding dawned in Anna's eyes. The woman was a saloon girl, probably working as one of the entertainers who provided company to lonely miners. It explained the expensive clothes. The girls who worked the mining camps often made more money than the miners themselves, and the lack of proper escort. Few men would risk their reputation being seen traveling with a woman of questionable virtue. "That's why you're traveling alone," Anna said gently. "Because no one would hire on to protect you." The woman nodded miserably. "The saloon closed when the camp started to empty out. The owner gave us our final wages and told us we were on our own. Most of the other girls headed for San Francisco, but I have family in Denver, or at least I did. I'm hoping they'll take me in, even after—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at what she'd become. Jack finally lowered his gun. "What's your name?" "Molly," the woman said. "Molly Chen. My father was Chinese, my mother was from Ireland. Neither of their families approved, so they came west where no one knew them. They're both gone now, but my mother's sister might still be in Denver. If I can just get there. Anna had the boot off now and was probing gently at the swollen ankle. Molly hissed in pain but didn't pull away. I don't think it's broken, Anna said, but you're not going to be riding for at least a week, maybe 2. I don't have a week, Molly said, panic rising in her voice. My supplies will run out, and those men who killed my escorts, they took most of my money, but not all of it. I've got about $50 sewn into my saddle. If they figure that out, they might come looking for me. What men? Jack's voice had gone hard. The ones who shot your escorts. Describe them. Molly's brow furrowed. One was Mexican, maybe 30, with a scar across his nose. The other 2 were white, brothers, I think, both blonde and big. Why? Jack and Anna exchanged glances. Those descriptions didn't match any of Silas's men that they knew of, but that didn't mean they weren't connected. Silas had enough money to hire anyone he wanted, and it wouldn't be the first time he'd used outsiders for his dirty work. No reason, Jack said, though his expression suggested otherwise. Look, you can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. But I need you to understand something. We're not exactly in a position to help anyone right now. We've got our own troubles, and adding you to the mix might be more risk than any of us can afford. I understand, Molly said quietly, and I'm grateful for even one night of safety. That's more than I've had in days. They settled Molly on the sleeping platform with her injured ankle elevated on a rolled blanket. Anna used strips torn from what remained of her wedding dress to bind the ankle tightly, providing support and compression to reduce the swelling. Molly tried to protest the sacrifice of Anna's clothing, but Anna just laughed. Trust me, this dress has been more trouble than it's worth since the moment I put it on. I'm happy to see it put to better use. As the night deepened, they took turns telling their stories. Molly learned about Anna's near-forced marriage, about Jack's intervention, about the chase and the fight at the cabin, and their flight into the mountains. In return, she told them about growing up in Sacramento, about her parents' death in a fire when she was 18, about the slow descent from respectable work as a seamstress to less respectable work in saloons, about the constant moving from camp to camp, following the strikes and the money. I'm not proud of what I became, Molly said softly. But I survived. And in the end, that's what matters, isn't it? We do what we have to do to survive. Survival isn't something to be ashamed of, Anna said firmly. Any woman who judges you for the choices you made to stay alive has never known real desperation. Jack had been quiet through most of this exchange, keeping watch at the window, but he spoke up now. Those men who killed your escorts, you said there were 3 of them. Did you happen to catch any names? Molly thought for a moment. The Mexican one, the others called him Chavez. That's all I remember. Jack's jaw tightened. Raul Chavez. He's a gun for hire out of New Mexico. Works for whoever pays best, and he's not particular about the jobs he takes. If he's in the area... He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. You think Silas hired him? Anna asked. I think it's possible, Jack said. Silas knows that Dutch failed. He knows I'm better with a gun than he anticipated. So he'd need to bring in someone with real skill if he wants to come after us again. Chavez would fit that bill. But Molly said Chavez killed her escorts 2 days ago, Anna pointed out. That was before the fight at your cabin. How could Silas have hired him that quickly? He couldn't, Jack admitted, which means either it's a coincidence or... He paused, thinking. Or Silas started planning for the possibility that he'd need serious help before any of this even started. The man's not stupid. He probably had Chavez on retainer just in case things went sideways with you. It was not a comforting thought. If Silas had been planning for contingencies all along, then he was more dangerous than they'd realized. And if he had men like Raul Chavez working for him, then their situation had just gone from dire to potentially fatal. We should leave at first light, Anna said. Get as far from here as we can before anyone figures out where we went. We can't, Jack said, frustration evident in his voice. I'm not healed enough for hard travel, and Molly sure as hell can't ride with that ankle. We need at least a few more days here. And besides, he gestured at the darkness beyond the window. Where would we go? We head north, we might run into Chavez and his boys. We head south, we're going back toward Prosperity and Silas. East takes us out into open prairie, where we'd be visible for miles, and west just leads deeper into the mountains where the trails get worse and the chances of running into hostile Utes increase considerably. So we're trapped, Anna said flatly. We're tactically positioned, Jack corrected with a wry smile. Big difference. Molly had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to bring more trouble down on you. If I'd known... You didn't know, Anna interrupted. And we don't even know for sure that those men who killed your escorts have anything to do with our situation. It might really just be coincidence. But none of them really believed that. In Anna's experience, things were rarely coincidental on the frontier. The world out here was too small, too interconnected, for things to happen in isolation. They kept watch in shifts that night, with Jack taking the first, Anna the second, and Molly insisting she could manage the third despite her injury. As Anna lay down for her brief rest period, she found herself thinking about the chain of events that had brought her to this point. If her mother hadn't gotten sick, her father wouldn't have gone into debt. If her father hadn't gone into debt, Silas wouldn't have had leverage to force a marriage. If Silas hadn't tried to force the marriage, Jack wouldn't have intervened. And if Jack hadn't intervened, Anna would either be married to a monster right now or dead from that whipping. She should be terrified. She should be despairing. Instead, she found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Alive. Truly, vibrantly alive in a way that had nothing to do with safety or security and everything to do with the simple fact that she was making her own choices now. She was deciding her own fate, even if that fate led somewhere dangerous. She was still contemplating this when sleep finally claimed her. The sound of gunfire snapped her awake. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back at Jack's cabin, that Dutch and his men had returned. Then reality reasserted itself and she realized the shots were coming from outside, somewhere down in the camp. Jack was already at the window, rifle in hand. Molly was awake too, pressed against the wall with fear stark in her eyes. How many? Anna asked, grabbing Jack's pistol from where it lay on the floor. Can't tell, Jack said. At least two, maybe more. They're down by the old shaft entrance, using the equipment for cover. More shots, and this time Anna could see the muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness. Whoever was out there wasn't shooting at their cabin specifically. They were shooting at something else. Or someone else. There, Molly pointed. By that collapsed cabin. Someone's running. Anna saw it too, a figure sprinting from one piece of cover to another, moving with the desperate speed of someone being hunted. As the person passed through a patch of moonlight, Anna caught a glimpse of long hair and a smaller stature. It's a woman, she breathed. The figure made it to cover behind a rusted ore cart just as bullets kicked up dirt where she'd been standing. She returned fire with a pistol, 3 quick shots that had one of the attackers yelping and ducking back behind the shaft entrance. She can shoot, Jack observed with a hint of admiration. But she's outnumbered and low on ammunition if I'm reading this right. They'll flank her within a few minutes. We have to help her, Anna said. We don't know who she is or what this is about, Jack pointed out. Could be claim jumpers fighting over a played-out mine. Could be a personal vendetta. Could be a lot of things that aren't our concern. Could be more of Silas's men, Anna countered. And even if it's not, are we really going to sit here and watch while someone gets killed? Jack was silent for a moment, then sighed. You know, you're going to get me killed with this conscience of yours. You're the one who stepped in to save me, Anna reminded him. This is your influence, not mine. Despite the danger, Jack smiled. Fair point. He checked his rifle, making sure it was fully loaded. All right. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to work my way around to the right, come up behind those boys at the shaft entrance. Anna, you take the pistol and provide covering fire from here. Not trying to hit anyone necessarily, just make them keep their heads down. Molly, you're going to light the biggest fire you can manage right here in the cabin. Make it smoky. Make it visible. I want them to think we're signaling for help. Are we signaling for help? Molly asked. No, but I want them to think someone might be coming. It'll make them nervous, might make them sloppy. Jack moved toward the door, then paused. And Anna? If this goes bad, if I don't make it back, you take Molly and you run. Don't wait. Don't try to help. Just go. Understand? I understand that you're not going to die, Anna said firmly, so I don't need to plan for that possibility. Jack looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're a hell of a woman, Anna Whitfield." "So I've been told," Anna said. "Now go save whoever that is before we lose the element of surprise." Jack slipped out into the darkness, moving with a grace that belied his injury. Anna positioned herself at the window, the pistol heavy in her hand. She'd fired guns before. Her father had taught her to shoot rabbits and occasionally a coyote that threatened their chickens, but she'd never fired at a person. Never fired with the intention of potentially taking a human life. Below, the woman behind the ore cart fired again, her ammunition clearly running low. One of the men at the shaft entrance shouted something Anna couldn't make out, and then two figures broke from cover, moving to flank the woman's position. Anna aimed carefully at the ground in front of the lead man and pulled the trigger. The pistol bucked in her hand, the report deafening, and dirt exploded near the man's feet. He yelped and dove behind a collapsed wheelbarrow, shouting curses. "There's someone in that cabin," he yelled to his companions. "We got more of them up there." Good. That was what Jack wanted. Confusion, distraction, anything to even the odds. Behind Anna, Molly was building up the fire, adding green branches that produced thick white smoke that billowed out the door and the broken window. It wouldn't actually summon help, but from a distance it would look like a signal fire, and that uncertainty would work in their favor. Anna fired again, this time aiming at the other flanking man. She missed by a good 10 feet, but it didn't matter. The man decided that discretion was the better part of valor and retreated to cover. Movement at the shaft entrance caught her eye. Jack had made it around and was now behind the main group of attackers, his rifle trained on them from about 20 yards away. "Drop your weapons." His voice rang out across the camp. "Now!" The men at the shaft entrance spun around, caught completely by surprise. There were 3 of them, Anna could see now, and from their rough clothing and the way they carried themselves, they weren't professional gunmen. Prospectors maybe, or claim jumpers, just desperate men trying to make a score. "I said drop them," Jack repeated. "I've got no quarrel with you boys, but I will put bullets in you if you don't comply." "Your choice." For a moment it could have gone either way. Then the apparent leader of the group, a big man with a beard down to his chest, carefully set his rifle on the ground. His companions followed suit, their hands going up in surrender. "Good decision," Jack said. He raised his voice. "Ma'am, behind the ore cart. You can come out now. These gentlemen and I have reached an understanding." The woman emerged slowly, her pistol still drawn but pointed at the ground. As she stepped into the growing light of dawn, Anna got her first good look at her. She was older than Anna had initially thought, perhaps 40, with the Native American features that spoke of Ute or possibly Shoshone heritage. Her hair was streaked with gray, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been injured recently and was trying not to show it. "You have my thanks, stranger," the woman said to Jack. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much lately. "These men have been tracking me for 2 days. I was beginning to think I wouldn't see another sunrise." "What do they want?" Jack asked, keeping his rifle trained on the 3 men even as he addressed the woman. "What all men want," the woman said bitterly. "What they think I can lead them to. Gold." The bearded man laughed, a harsh sound. "Not just any gold, you old witch. The lost Dutchman mine. And you know where it is, don't you? Your grandfather was the one who found it originally." "My grandfather died 40 years ago without telling a soul where his strike was," the woman said. "And I sure as hell don't know, but these idiots won't believe me." "Because we found your grandfather's journal," another of the men said. He was younger, barely out of his teens, with desperate eyes. "It's got a map in it, and you're in that journal, mentioned by name. You know something, even if you don't want to admit it." Anna had heard stories about the Lost Dutchman mine. Everyone in Colorado had. A massive gold strike supposedly found by a mysterious prospector in the 1830s, worked in secret until the prospector died without revealing its location. Dozens of men had spent their lives searching for it, dying in the mountains chasing a dream that might not even exist. "Let me guess," Jack said. "You thought you could force her to tell you where it is." "We just wanted to ask her some questions," the bearded man said. "She's the one who started shooting. After you broke into my camp and tried to tie me up," the woman snarled, "I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I know what men like you do to women they think have something they want." Jack considered this for a moment, then came to a decision. "Here's what's going to happen. You 3 are going to mount up and ride out of here. You're going to forget you ever saw this woman, forget about your treasure hunt, and find some other way to get rich. In exchange, I won't shoot you, and I won't report you to the marshal in Denver for attempted kidnapping and assault." "That's it?" the young one said. "You're just letting us go?" "I'm giving you a chance to walk away with your lives and your freedom," Jack said. "Most men don't get that many chances out here. I suggest you take it." The three men gathered their weapons slowly, keeping their movements careful and obvious. They backed away toward where their horses were picketed, mounted up, and rode out without another word. Within minutes, they disappeared down the trail, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats. The native woman holstered her pistol and turned to Jack. "You're either very trusting or very foolish. Those men will tell others what happened here. Others who might also want to find me and ask their questions." "Then it's a good thing you're not staying here," Jack said. He lowered his rifle finally, and Anna saw him wince as the movement pulled at his wound. "Neither are we, for that matter. This camp just became a lot less secret than it was yesterday." Anna emerged from the cabin, with Molly limping out behind her. The native woman studied them both with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Quite a collection you've got here," she observed. A wounded gunman, a girl in a torn wedding dress, a saloon girl with a twisted ankle, and now me. We must look like the sorriest bunch of refugees this side of the Mississippi. "We're survivors," Anna corrected. "There's a difference." The woman's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "I suppose there is." She extended her hand. "Sarah Redfeather, and I'm in your debt for the intervention, whatever your reasons for it." "Jack Mercer," Jack said, shaking her hand. "This is Anna Whitfield, Molly Chen, and the horses. We're light on names for the horses." "Well met, Jack Mercer and Company," Sarah said. "Now, since we've established that staying here is inadvisable, might I suggest we pool our resources and travel together? At least until we're clear of whatever trouble seems to be following all of us." "You know these mountains?" Jack asked. "I was born in these mountains," Sarah said. "My mother's people have been here for 10 generations. I know every trail, every pass, every place where water can be found and where it can't. If you need a guide, you're looking at the best one you'll find." Jack looked at Anna, a question in his eyes. She thought about it for only a moment before nodding. They needed help, needed knowledge of the terrain, and needed someone who could move through this country without leaving the obvious trail that they'd been leaving. "All right," Jack said. "We travel together, at least until Denver." "Denver," Sarah repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, Denver might be wise. It's big enough to get lost in, and there's a marshal there who actually enforces the law rather than taking bribes. If you're running from something, it's a good place to run to." They spent the rest of the morning breaking camp and preparing to move out. Jack's wound needed fresh dressing, and Anna tended to it while Sarah gathered what supplies they'd need for the journey. Molly's ankle was still too swollen for her to ride properly, so they fashioned a sort of carrier on one of the horses where she could sit without putting weight on the injury. "We're quite a sight," Molly observed as they finally set out around midday. "A traveling circus of the wounded and wanted." "At least we're traveling," Anna said. She was walking beside Jack's horse again, wearing a shirt that Sarah had produced from her own meager supplies. It was too big and smelled of smoke and horse, but it was whole, and it covered her better than the torn wedding dress had. "A few days ago, I thought I'd be married to Silas Granger by now. Instead, I'm hiking through the Colorado mountains with 3 people I'd never met before this week. Life is strange." "Life is strange," Jack agreed, "but sometimes strange is better than the alternative." They climbed higher into the mountains, following trails that Sarah seemed to navigate by instinct. She'd been right about knowing this country. She moved through it like a ghost, finding paths that didn't show on any map, leading them to water sources that saved them hours of searching, and warning them away from areas where the Utes had recent activity. That night they camped in a box canyon that provided shelter from the wind and had only one entrance that could easily be watched. They built a small fire, carefully positioned so the smoke would dissipate before becoming visible from a distance, and shared a meal of beans and the last of their hardtack. "So," Sarah said, studying Anna and Jack across the fire, "you going to tell me the real story of why you're running? Because I've seen men run from the law before, and you don't have that look. You've got the look of people running from something more personal." Jack and Anna exchanged glances. Finally, Anna spoke, telling Sarah the same story they'd told Molly, about Silas, about the forced marriage, about Jack's intervention and everything that followed. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face impassive. When Anna finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "This Silas Granger," she said finally, "he's a man who's used to getting what he wants. And when men like that don't get what they want, they don't stop trying. They don't forgive. They don't forget." "I know," Anna said quietly. "Which means you two have a choice to make," Sarah continued. "You can keep running, keep looking over your shoulder, keep wondering when he's going to catch up. Or you can turn and face him, deal with this problem directly, and end it one way or another." "We can't face him," Jack said. "He's got money, men, and the law on his side. We've got nothing except the clothes on our backs and the guns we're carrying." "You've got each other," Sarah pointed out. "You've got people who owe you debts, me included. You've got the truth on your side, and you've got the fact that what he did, trying to force a woman to marry him through violence and coercion, is something a lot of people would find distasteful even if it's technically legal." "What are you suggesting?" Anna asked. "I'm suggesting that running might save your lives, but it won't give you your lives back," Sarah said. "You'll always be fugitives, always be looking over your shoulder. But if you could somehow turn the tables on him, expose what he did, maybe even get the law on your side instead of his," she shrugged. "It's a risk. But it might be worth taking." Jack shook his head. "Too dangerous. We'd have to go back to Prosperity, face Silas on his home ground." "Not Prosperity," Sarah interrupted. "Denver, like I said, there's a marshal there who actually follows the law. If you could get to him, tell your story, maybe even get some of those townspeople from Prosperity to testify about what they saw." She let the thought hang in the air. Anna felt something stirring in her chest, something that might have been hope or might have been foolishness. "You think people would testify against Silas, after he's held power over them for so long?" "I think people are tired of being afraid," Sarah said. "I think they're tired of watching men like Silas Granger do whatever they want without consequences. And I think if someone were brave enough to stand up to him publicly, others might find the courage to stand up too." They talked long into the night, debating the idea from every angle. By the time the fire burned down to embers, they'd formed something that wasn't quite a plan, but was more than just blind hope. They would continue to Denver as originally intended. Once there, Sarah would use her contacts to find the marshal and arrange a meeting. Jack and Anna would tell their story, present what evidence they had, and request official protection. Then, if the marshal was willing, they would send word to Prosperity, inviting anyone who'd witnessed the events to come forward. It was risky. It relied on the honesty of a marshal they'd never met and the courage of townspeople who'd already proven themselves willing to stand by while terrible things happened. But it was something, and something was better than nothing. As Anna finally lay down to sleep, she found herself thinking about Jack's offer again. Montana, a ranch, a life that could be theirs if they survived this. She rolled over to look at him where he sat keeping first watch, his profile sharp against the starlight. "Jack?" she said softly. "Yeah?" "That thing you said, about me coming to Montana with you, about making it real instead of just a lie to save me." She paused, gathering her courage. "Did you mean it?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "I meant it. Every word. But Anna, I don't have much to offer. The ranch is small, the house needs work, and the winters are brutal. You'd be marrying a man who's got more scars than savings and more enemies than friends." "I'd be marrying a man who stepped in front of a whip for a stranger," Anna said softly. "A man who risked his life to save mine. A man who keeps his word and stands up for what's right, even when it costs him." "That sounds like more than most women get." "Is that a yes?" Jack asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice even though she couldn't see his face clearly. "That's a ask me again when we're not being hunted and I'm not sleeping on the ground wearing someone else's shirt," Anna said. "Ask me in Denver when we've got a real chance at a future. And then we'll see." "I can do that," Jack said. Anna closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreaming of a future that might actually be possible if they were brave enough and lucky enough to survive long enough to claim it. Denver rose from the plains like a promise made manifest, its church spires and false front buildings catching the afternoon sun as their ragged group crested the final ridge on the 6th day of travel. Anna had to stop herself from weeping at the sight. She'd begun to think civilization was something she'd imagined, that the whole world had become nothing but mountains and trails and the constant vigilance of looking over one's shoulder for pursuers who might or might not be coming. They'd made good time despite Molly's injury and Jack's still healing wound, thanks largely to Sarah's knowledge of shortcuts that shaved days off what would have been a 2-week journey by conventional routes. They'd also been lucky. No sign of Silas's men, no encounters with Raul Chavez or his companions, no trouble beyond a brief argument with a bear over their food supplies that had ended with the bear claiming victory in their dinner. Now, looking down at Denver spreading across the landscape below, Anna felt the first real stirring of hope since this whole nightmare had begun. Denver meant law and order, or at least the closest approximation the frontier could offer. It meant witnesses and protection and the possibility of actually fighting back instead of just running. "It's bigger than I remembered," Jack said from atop his horse. His color had improved over the past few days, and he was moving with less obvious pain, though Anna knew he was still far from fully healed. Must have grown considerable in the last few years. "Gold will do that to a place," Sarah observed. She'd been to Denver more recently than any of them, having passed through only a few months before. "Every man with a dream and a pickaxe thinks he's going to strike it rich. Most of them end up broken, but the city grows fat on their hopes regardless." They descended the ridge as the sun began its slow slide toward the western peaks, reaching the outskirts of Denver as the first lamps were being lit in windows. The contrast between the wilderness they'd been living in and this bustling hub of humanity was jarring. Wagons rumbled past, stirring up dust. Men shouted greetings to each other across muddy streets. Somewhere a piano was playing badly, and somewhere else a dog was barking with the insistent rhythm of an animal that would keep it up until someone threw something at it. Sarah led them to a modest boarding house on the edge of the respectable district, run by a woman she knew from previous visits. Mrs. Abernathy took one look at their bedraggled group and quoted a price that was probably twice what she'd normally charge, but which included hot baths, clean clothes, and 2 rooms with actual beds and doors that locked. Jack paid without haggling, counting out coins from the dwindling supply in his leather pouch. "Tomorrow, we find Marshall Hendricks," Sarah said as Mrs. Abernathy led them upstairs. "Tonight, we rest and make ourselves presentable. You show up at the marshal's office looking like refugees from a Ute raid. He's going to have questions about more than just Silas Granger." Anna's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. She stood at that window for a long time after Mrs. Abernathy left, watching the flow of life below. All these people going about their ordinary business, worrying about ordinary things. None of them being hunted, none of them having killed a man or watched men die. None of them carrying the weight of choices that might determine whether they lived or died. She'd been a different person a week ago. That Anna Whitfield had worried about small things, whether the bread would rise properly, whether she'd remembered to feed the chickens, whether she could make her father's borrowed money stretch far enough to buy the medicine he needed. That Anna had been concerned with survival in the mundane sense, the day-to-day struggle of keeping a failing farm afloat and a dying father comfortable. This Anna had bigger concerns. This Anna had blood on her hands, even if she hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. This Anna had made choices that had led to violence and death. This Anna had run away with a stranger and was now contemplating marrying him, not out of desperation like her father had wanted, but out of something that felt dangerously close to love. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Jack standing in the hallway, freshly bathed and shaved, wearing clean clothes that Mrs. Abernathy had somehow procured. He looked almost respectable, though the gun at his hip and the way his eyes constantly scanned the hallway suggested that respectability was a thin veneer over something more dangerous. "Just wanted to check that you were settled," he said, "and to tell you that Sarah's gone to make some inquiries about Marshall Hendricks. She's got contacts in the city who can tell us whether he's the kind of man we can trust or the kind who'll turn us over to Silas for the right price." "And if he's the latter?" Anna asked. "Then we move on to Plan B," Jack said. "What's Plan B?" "I'm still working on that part." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Anna, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do, going to the law, telling our story, hoping that justice actually happens, It's risky as hell. There's a good chance it backfires. A good chance that Silas's money and influence mean more to the marshal than the truth does. And if that happens, we'll be worse off than we are now because we'll have shown our hand and gotten nothing for it. I know, Anna said. But Sarah's right about one thing. I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder. If there's even a chance we can end this, we have to take it. Jack studied her face for a long moment. You've gotten braver, he observed. Or maybe you were always brave and I just didn't notice at first. I don't feel brave, Anna admitted. I feel terrified most of the time. But my mother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. So I guess I'm trying to be courageous. Your mother was a wise woman, Jack said. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. And when this is over, when we're on the other side of whatever comes next, I'm going to ask you that question again, the one you told me to wait on. I remember, Anna said softly. Her heart was beating faster, and she was acutely aware of how close he was standing, how his thumb was tracing small circles on the back of her hand. And I'll give you my answer then. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly that it should have seemed ridiculous coming from a rough frontier rancher. Instead, it made Anna's breath catch. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left, and Anna closed the door behind him, leaning against it with her eyes closed and her hand still tingling from where he'd kissed it. She was in so much trouble. She'd gone and fallen for him, completely and utterly, and there was nothing she could do about it except hope they both survived long enough for it to matter. Sarah returned late that evening with news. Marshal Hendricks was, by all accounts, an honest man, a rarity in frontier law enforcement where corruption was more common than competence. He'd been appointed 2 years ago after his predecessor had been caught taking bribes from various criminal enterprises, and he'd spent most of his tenure cleaning house and making enemies. The good news was that he couldn't be bought. The bad news was that he was also cautious to the point of paranoia, having survived 2 assassination attempts in his first year on the job. He won't take your word for anything, Sarah explained as they gathered in the room Anna shared with Molly. He'll want evidence, witnesses, something concrete he can act on. A story about a forced marriage and a forged document isn't going to be enough, not when the man you're accusing is as wealthy and connected as Silas Granger. What about the townspeople who saw what happened? Anna asked. The Reverend? The people who watched Silas try to have me whipped? That's your best bet, Sarah agreed. If we can get even 1 or 2 of them to come to Denver and testify, to make official statements about what they witnessed, then Hendricks will have something to work with. But how do we convince them to do that? Molly spoke up from where she sat with her ankle elevated. It was healing well, the swelling much reduced, though she still couldn't put her full weight on it. These are people who stood by and watched while Anna was dragged to a whipping post. They didn't help her then. Why would they help her now? Because now she's not alone and helpless, Jack said. She's got us. She's got a story that's already spread beyond prosperity. News like that travels fast on the frontier. And she's got the backing of a federal marshal if Hendricks agrees to help. People are more willing to be brave when they're not the only ones being brave. They spent the rest of the evening planning their approach. In the morning, Jack and Anna would go to the marshal's office, while Sarah would use her contacts to start spreading word through the Denver gossip networks about what had happened in Prosperity. Public opinion could be a powerful weapon, and if they could turn sentiment against Silas before he had a chance to control the narrative, it might force Hendricks's hand in their favor. Anna barely slept that night, her mind racing through all the things that could go wrong. But when dawn came and she dressed in the clean clothes Mrs. Abernathy had provided, a simple dress in dark blue that was worn but respectable, she felt calmer. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Either they'd find justice here, or they'd confirm that justice was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. Marshal Hendricks' office was in a brick building near the center of town, sharing space with the jail and the territorial courthouse. It was more impressive than Anna had expected, a symbol of Denver's aspirations to be taken seriously as more than just another rough mining town. They climbed the steps together, Jack's hand hovering near his gun not out of hostility but out of habit, and pushed through the heavy wooden door. The interior was Spartan but organized, with wanted posters covering one wall and a large desk dominating the center of the room. Behind that desk sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains outside Denver, all hard angles and weathered edges. Marshall Hendricks was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair cut military short and eyes that seemed to catalog and assess everything they saw. A scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, a souvenir from one of those assassination attempts Sarah had mentioned. He looked up as they entered, his expression neutral, but his hand dropping to rest casually on the pistol at his hip. "Help you folks?" His voice was gravel and whiskey, roughened by years of shouting orders and breathing too much dust. "Marshall Hendricks," Jack began. "My name is Jack Mercer, and this is Anna Whitfield. We're here to report a crime and request your assistance." Hendricks' eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of crime?" Anna stepped forward, surprised to find her voice steady. "Attempted coercion into forced marriage, assault, and multiple counts of attempted murder. The man responsible is Silas Granger, owner of the Double G Ranch outside of Prosperity, Colorado." For a long moment, Hendricks just stared at her. Then he leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "Silas Granger, one of the wealthiest men in 3 counties, employs more than 60 men, owns enough land that you could fit a small European country on it, and has enough political connections that he's on a first-name basis with the territorial governor." He paused. "And you're here to tell me he's a criminal?" "I'm here to tell you he tried to force me into marriage through coercion and violence," Anna said firmly. "And when I refused and Jack helped me escape, he sent armed men after us. Men who shot Jack, killed others, and would have killed us if we hadn't been lucky and well armed." "That's a serious accusation," Hendricks said. His tone was carefully neutral, giving nothing away about what he thought of their story. "You got any proof?" Jack reached into his jacket slowly, making sure Hendricks could see he was only going for documents and not a weapon, and pulled out the forged contract. "This is the document I used to get Anna away from Silas initially. It's a forgery, I'll admit that freely. But the reason I had to forge it is because Silas had a different contract, one signed by Anna's father promising her in marriage in exchange for payment of his debts." Hendricks took the document and studied it carefully, his eyes moving over the text with the attention to detail of a man who'd seen his share of forgeries and frauds. "This is actually pretty good work," he said finally. "The ink matches the age, the paper's right for the period, even the handwriting looks authentic. You do this yourself?" "Does it matter?" Jack asked. "It matters if I'm trying to assess your character," Hendricks said. "A man who can forge documents this well is a man with certain skills. Skills that might make me wonder about the truth of everything else you're telling me." "I forged one document to save a woman from being whipped in public," Jack said. "If that makes me a criminal in your eyes, then I guess I'm a criminal. But I'm not the one who tried to buy a bride like she was a piece of livestock." "Fair point," Hendricks conceded. He set the document aside and focused his attention on Anna. "Tell me what happened, Miss Whitfield, from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." So Anna told him. She told him about her father's debts, about Silas's offer, about the contract her father had signed in desperation. She told him about standing in the church in her mother's wedding dress, about refusing to speak the vows, about being dragged through the street to the whipping post while the whole town watched. She told him about Jack's intervention, about the escape, about Dutch and his men, about the fight at the cabin. Jack filled in the parts she didn't know firsthand, the confrontation in town, the chase, the specifics of the gunfight. Between them, they laid out the whole sorry tale, every detail they could remember. Hendricks listened without interrupting, his face giving away nothing. When they'd finished, he was quiet for a long time, tapping his fingers on the desk in a rhythm that might have been thoughtful or might have been irritated. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "If true, it would suggest that Silas Granger is guilty of multiple serious crimes: coercion, assault, conspiracy to commit murder. We could probably add kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment to the list. But here's my problem." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "You're 2 people I've never met, making accusations against a man with impeccable credentials and deep pockets. You've got no physical evidence except a forged document and a lot of words. And words are cheap on the frontier. Every criminal I've ever arrested had a story about why they weren't really guilty, why the real criminal was someone else, why they were the victim. "So you're not going to help us?" Anna said flatly. She'd known it was a possibility, but the disappointment still hit her like a physical blow. "I didn't say that," Hendricks corrected. "I said I need more than just your word. If you want me to move against a man like Silas Granger, I need evidence. I need witnesses. I need something I can take to a judge that won't get laughed out of court and won't get me removed from office for harassment of prominent citizens." "What about the people in Prosperity who saw what happened?" Jack asked. "Would their testimony count as evidence?" "If they're willing to make official statements, yes," Hendricks said. "If you can get me 3 or more credible witnesses who will testify to what they saw, I'll have enough to at least open an investigation. And once I have an investigation, I can start digging, and I guarantee you a man like Silas Granger has skeletons in closets that he doesn't want found." "How do we get those witnesses?" Anna asked. "We can't go back to Prosperity. Silas will have men watching for us." "You don't go back," Hendricks said. He pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. "I'll send deputies with official summons for testimony in a federal investigation. They'll go to Prosperity, identify potential witnesses, and offer them protection to come to Denver and make statements. Your job is to give me names. Who saw what happened? Who might be willing to talk?" Anna thought back to that morning in Prosperity, trying to remember faces in the crowd. "Reverend Walsh," she said. "He tried to stop it, tried to convince Silas to reconsider. He saw everything." "Good," Hendricks said, writing. "Who else?" "Mrs. Patterson from the general store, Tom Bradshaw, the blacksmith, the Hendersons, the Clarks, the Morgans, all families who were there." Anna closed her eyes, visualizing the scene. "Cornelius Finch, Silas's attorney. He's the one who examined Jack's forged contract and declared it legitimate. An attorney might be useful," Hendricks mused. "He'd have professional credibility. Anyone else?" "Dutch Kemper," Jack said. "Silas's foreman, the one I shot at the cabin. He's probably back in Prosperity by now, and he knows everything that happened. If you could get him to turn on Silas, maybe offer him immunity in exchange for testimony." "A man like that won't turn easily," Hendricks interrupted. "But it's worth trying." He finished writing and looked up at them. "I'll send my deputies out today. It'll take them 3 days to get to Prosperity, assuming good weather. Figure another week to interview potential witnesses and arrange for those willing to testify to travel back to Denver. So you're looking at about 10 days before we know if this is going anywhere." "And in the meantime?" Anna asked. "In the meantime, you stay in Denver, keep your heads down, and don't do anything stupid," Hendricks said. "I'm going to assign a deputy to keep an eye on you. Make sure nobody tries to silence potential witnesses before they can talk. And if you see anyone suspicious, anyone who might be working for Granger, you come straight to me. Understood?" They both nodded. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than Anna had dared hope for. Hendricks was at least willing to investigate, to give them a chance to prove their case. As they stood to leave, Hendricks spoke again. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. Mercer, I want to be clear about something. If what you've told me is true, if Silas Granger really did what you say he did, then I will see him brought to justice. I don't care how rich he is or how many friends he has in high places. The law applies to everyone or it applies to no one. But if I find out you've lied to me, if this is some elaborate scheme to extort money from Granger or damage his reputation, then I will personally see you both hanged for fraud and conspiracy. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear," Jack said. They left the marshal's office and stepped back out into the bright Colorado sunshine. Anna felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in days. They had a chance. It was slim. It depended on the courage of people who'd already proven themselves cowards, but it was something. "Now what?" she asked Jack. "Now we wait," he said, "and hope that when the moment comes, the good people of Prosperity remember that silence is also a choice." The next 10 days passed with agonizing slowness. They stayed at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, venturing out only for necessities and always under the watchful eye of Deputy Marshal Tom Crawford, a young man with serious eyes and a careful manner who took his assignment to protect them seriously. Sarah continued making discreet inquiries and spreading carefully worded stories about what had happened in Prosperity. Within days, the tale had grown in the telling, as frontier stories always did. Some versions had Silas trying to buy a dozen brides. Others had Jack fighting off 20 men single-handed. The truth was sensational enough without embellishment, but embellishment was what the frontier did best. Molly's ankle healed enough that she could walk without limping, and she announced her intention to stay in Denver and look for work. "I'm done with mining camps," she said. "Denver's big enough that I can find respectable work, or at least work that won't get me killed." Sarah was more restless, unused to confinement in a city. She spent her days wandering the streets, gathering information and gossip, serving as their eyes and ears in a place where they had to be careful about showing their faces too publicly. As for Anna and Jack, they existed in a strange state of suspended animation. They were constantly together but couldn't act on the feelings that had grown between them because nothing was resolved. Jack's proposal, if that's what it had been, hung between them like something fragile that might shatter if examined too closely. They talked about safe things, about the weather and the food at the boarding house and the peculiarities of city life. They didn't talk about what would happen if Hendrix's investigation failed, if the witnesses refused to testify, if Silas's influence proved too strong to overcome. On the 8th day, Deputy Crawford burst into the boarding house with news. "Marshall wants to see you," he said, slightly out of breath. "Says it's urgent." They practically ran to the marshal's office, Anna's heart in her throat. Urgent could mean anything. It could mean the witnesses had arrived. It could mean Silas had somehow gotten to Hendrix. It could mean the whole investigation was falling apart. Hendrix was waiting for them, and he wasn't alone. Standing in his office were 3 people Anna recognized from Prosperity. Reverend Walsh, looking nervous but determined. Tom Bradshaw, the blacksmith, his massive arms crossed over his chest. And to Anna's surprise, Cornelius Finch, Silas's attorney, looking like a man who'd just bet everything on a single roll of the dice. "These gentlemen have traveled a long way to see you," Hendrix said. "And they've got some interesting things to say. Reverend, why don't you start?" Reverend Walsh stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Miss Whitfield, Mr. Mercer, I want to start by apologizing. I should have done more that day, should have stood up to Silas more forcefully, but I was afraid, and I let that fear make me a coward." "You tried to stop it," Anna said. "That's more than most people did." "I tried with words," Walsh said, "but I should have been willing to do more. Anyway, when the marshal's deputies came asking questions, I knew I had a chance to make things right. I've given a full statement about what I witnessed that day. The contract your father signed under duress, the scene at the church, the whipping post, all of it. And I'm not alone." Tom Bradshaw spoke next, his deep voice rumbling. "There's 8 of us total who've agreed to testify. Would have been more, but Silas has people scared. He's been making threats, saying anyone who cooperates with this investigation will find their businesses burned down or their cattle poisoned. But some of us are done being scared." "Mr. Finch," Hendrix said, "you want to tell them what you told me?" The attorney looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I've practiced law for 20 years, he said, "and in that time, I've done things I'm not proud of, bent rules I shouldn't have bent, looked the other way when I should have been paying attention. But what Silas Granger did to you, Miss Whitfield, crossed a line I can't ignore. That contract your father signed wasn't legally binding. A contract entered into under duress is invalid, and a father can't sell his daughter into marriage even if he wants to. I knew that. Silas knew I knew it. But he paid me well to keep quiet and make it seem legitimate." "Why come forward now?" Jack asked suspiciously. "Because 3 days ago, Silas came to me with a new contract," Finch said. "He wanted me to help him forge documents that would give him legal claim to Anna Whitfield's property, her inheritance, everything her father left behind. And he wanted me to arrange for a marriage license dated before her father's death, to make it look like the marriage had actually happened, and he was her legitimate widower. That's fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. And I realized that if I helped him do that, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror anymore." He pulled out a folder and handed it to Hendrix. "Those are copies of every document Silas has ever asked me to prepare, going back 5 years. Some of it's legitimate business, a lot of it isn't. There's evidence in there of land fraud, witness intimidation, and possibly involvement in the death of his second wife, though I can't prove that last part." Hendrix's eyes gleamed as he flipped through the documents. "Mr. Finch, this is quite the insurance policy you've brought me.